Thank you, everybody. I'm Bob Boland. Welcome to another Culture and Sports Cultural Roundtable webinar. It's my great privilege to do these on occasion and bring the best of ideas and the most topical of ideas to people in this business who are out there interested in living in this space. We're very excited if you're here and if you're joining us live. We can't be happier that you're here. This is about as topical a panel as we possibly could have because it's even expanded since we began it. When we came up with the idea to talk about, oh crap, what's next? The crisis of sports betting and the shotgun wedding and toxic marriage this has endured. We had only had one sport that was seemingly in crisis. It was basketball, and now shoot, we're in it with another sport, baseball, and with a new form of betting and small money. I've got two of the best people to talk about anything involving a crisis. I've got Jeff Chatterton, who I have the privilege of talking to once a week most of the time, talking a little bit about leaders under fire. That's your book, Jeff. Tell us, and I know you're a crisis communicator, but why don't you tell the audience the things that you work on and what you believe in?
Well, yeah. Thanks, Bob. I'm a big advocate of the truth is not friendly, but the truth is your friend. Um, and so I work with companies and organizations that want to tell the truth even when the truth is not friendly. So I've had the privilege and the real opportunity to work with a lot of Major League Sport venues, a number of different sports teams in five or six continents now. I think the last time I checked, it was 17 major NBA, NHL, NRL, NBL, Major League Baseball, and NFL franchises. So,
And the occasional water park, right?
oh, and yeah, lots of that, aside from pro sports, a lot of lifeguard organizations, a lot of aquatic theme parks and amusement parks and facilities, and I'm the bad news bearer. I'm the guy who gets called
I,
in
I,
when things
I,
go.
I like that. You've also written a book called Leaders Under Fire, which we teased a second ago. Talk to us about that book for a second.
So I co-wrote the book with a good friend of mine and a competitor named Conway Fraser. We basically sat down and came up with what we hold, even though we are competitors, what we hold to be the inalienable truths about communicating in a high risk, low trust environment. What do you do when it comes to communicating? And we put together in some stories. We had some fun with it. It was more work than we thought it would be, but I think it was a project that was worth doing.
Is there a takeaway you'd want to start with? If for anybody who's listening, anybody who will listen to this in YouTube down the road, is there a takeaway that you would say that the book shares and that we're going to talk about in the next hour?
I think this particular issue is, you know what, the tendency, especially when you're talking about crisis communications, the tendency is to talk about, well, here's what you want to say in order to make this better. Um, and I don't think that's what Adam Silver needs to hear right now. I think the very fact that it was the FBI and not the NBA that announced that there was a problem in the first place is tremendously embarrassing. They have some structural integrity issues, and if they can't come out and acknowledge that we have a problem and we need to address that, and here's what we are going to do, then it won't really matter.
That's a great point. Let me not keep our other guest waiting. And the problem for Doug Logan is the introduction could take the hour, so we won't go there. We'll make it quick. I had the pleasure of getting a cold call once from Doug Logan asking about the possibility of teaching, and the ultimate answer was yes for me. I knew who he was, I knew what he'd done, I knew the character of this man from others, and I've been pleased enough for the last decade or so to be Doug's friend, and to share in that great reputation. Doug's had two of the most important jobs in sports. I think one of the unique ones, particularly in global sport, You were the founding commissioner of Major League Soccer, the MLS. So we have an actual commissioner. If we're going to take the tact of going behind the scenes in a commissioner's mind, in the culture of advice around a commissioner in this moment, and then the legal issues and the public relations issues. Doug's our perfect partner in this one. Doug also headed USA Track and Field, so you headed the biggest Olympic sport on the stage. And while Jeff was talking about arenas, Doug, you've run a bunch of them through your career and been one of the most noted consultants in that area. Also a military veteran, a raconteur, great person. I always tell this story and leave it. If Doug, if you weren't real, Hemingway would have had to write about you to as a fictional character. But Doug, let's start off. And what would you want the audience to know a little who hadn't met you today? Would you want them to know anything more about your background in this area that I could do a poor job of introducing?
No, I'm humbled by the way you've introduced me. The way you introduced me in writing opened up the floodgates for my kids to give me a good shellacking in the course of the last couple of days. But that's neither here nor there. No, I've been involved in the business of sports and entertainment, and I was talking to Jeff briefly ahead of time. What that did was that it put me right in the crosshairs of um, what I call jeopardy. You know, uh, they are businesses that have a certain amount of built-in jeopardy to them. And when you go through your "oh crap" moment, you have to um, resource within yourself and within your team and within perhaps a larger group, good minds and good instincts. But at the end of the day, to have jobs like I had, there's only one chair there, and you have to take a deep breath and say that this is the way we're going. So I'm anxious to get involved in this conversation. I think the conversation is much larger than just gambling. I think it's morality in sports. I think it's I mean, right now at the same time that my good friend Adam is facing this problem that he's got um, with gambling and being associated with it, he's also wrestling with the problem that his wealthiest owner has obviously bypassed the salary cap and passed on $28 million to Kawhi Leonard in some fashion that may be legal or illegal, moral or immoral, but certainly circumvented a contract that he's got with the players. So it's a larger issue of not only gambling, but cheating, but going to the very heart of what those of us who grew up, in the old um, amateur sports days of, there's a certain amount of nobility over and honor over the competition. They are businesses that from time to time get really sullied by I have to go back on my Catholicism and say original sin. So.
I liken this. I liken this because I think any sin in sports hits like original sin. It has a long-lasting taint and a long-lasting effect.
See.
Anybody who doesn't know me, who's in the audience, you know that I spent 5 years of my life in what I always describe as the weirdest job in the world as athletic integrity officer at Penn State. Uh, my job was created out of a sex scandal to some degree, a horrific pedophilic sex scandal that went unreported in a variety of ways. But ultimately, what were the challenges on my plate when I got there as the second person in the job? The first one of those was legalized sports betting. The idea that the Murphy decision had been struck down in 2018 by the Supreme Court, and states took, principally in the United States, took three postures. There were states who wanted no part of it, and they're a massive majority of about five right now out there that have resisted legalized sports betting. There were groups that were straining at the bit to enter it, so they either had laws that were in place or had that would come into effect the minute passed by the law that the Supreme Court struck down in Murphy went into effect. And then there were some kind of watching, waiting, and running. So far, just if we think about it, 39 states have allowed legalized sports betting. Four more allowed on tribal sports books located in the state, which means that you can pretty much place a bet anywhere in America and now in Ontario, right, Jeff?
Oh yeah, no, it was similar setup, similar construction. Yep.
Which
Yeah,
means,
but that's not new, Bob. You
yeah,
always could. You always could. The only
yeah.
question was, could you do it under the color of the law or could you not? But you always could, and people always did.
And that's a terrific point. That's absolutely the history. Sports ran it as anathema going back, and I think one of the things we want to put out there is this little bit of history here. It was the existential threat. It was the serpent in the Garden of Eden, wasn't it, Doug?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what and I can go on for for a long time talking about this, but for decades, what it was those who formed the capital to own the product, okay, strive mightily to reach a moral high ground with it. Okay, and they were going to hire the sheriffs, the Kennesaw Mountain Landises to resolve the Black Sox issue and Shoeless Joe. They grabbed the high ground, and I'm going to go to your date of 2018. As important as the Supreme Court decision was, the decision by the NFL to allow Bob Kraft and Jerry Jones to invest in fantasy, okay, was the beginning of the elimination of high ground for those who owned the brands and those who own the product. And they've been playing defense ever since.
That would be almost framing it the perfect thing we lawyers and law professors call the beginning of the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Or as I look over to my right, my wife has this little frame print of the devil's toboggan of how you fall from decency to sin,
Mm.
uh, and including liquor, loose women, and hanging out in saloons, and then ultimately gambling toward the bottom of it. We all kind of recognize that to some degree these are vices, but as you indicate, Doug, they became business, and now they're an incredibly big business. Jeff, what happens when you challenge one of the functional business models in sport, and it's the thing that's actually biting you, the thing that helps make you money? How do you give advice to around somebody that, like, how do we divorce our or cut off our arm or our leg, if you will, in this case, or how do we
Well,
try to say it's
I
not
mean
broken?
it because you're right. It is very much a part of the body right now. ESPN owns a piece of the NFL. I mean, they're you know
Yeah.
between Red Zone and all of the different properties that are out there, but they also own ESPN Bet. Um, how
And
do
in
you?
fact, they decided they weren't making as much money in their ESPN bet partnership this week and picked a new partner.
Yeah, it so I mean, yeah, there are certain things that I could. I mean, I if you were to say what three things would I recommend Adam Silver implement on a structural level? I think number one, you know, the ship has sailed in terms of sponsorship and everything else. You're going to have Bet365. You're going to have DraftKings. You're going to have all of the different things that are out there. You can't do anything about that, but you can go to them and say, hey, look, we need to get rid of the individual player prop bets. Those are the most easy to manipulate. Those are the most tempting. Those are the ones that a young rookie player who's low on money can go and easily manipulate because he all of a sudden has a cramp and only produces 3 points that game. Um, if we take that away, and if they're not prepared to take away individual player prop bets, then I think we could have a bigger question about sponsorship and promotions and everything along those lines. But let's pick the low hanging fruit. Um, second,
Yeah, and and they just went after the low hanging fruit, and you saw what they did, right? They didn't eliminate it. They just eliminated it from parlays and put a $200 cap on it.
yeah,
I don't know what worse imagery that has created. You couldn't. It's the worst of all possible worlds. Yeah, we're going to still allow it to exist because that's the action, right? But we're going to put
it's saying
these
that your
fences around
stat
it.
lines are for sale. It's saying that the
Exactly.
product, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a bad look.
And in fact, it allowed a columnist who I don't always agree with, but always thinks has something to say, Dave Zirin, to write in the Nation that Adam Silver showed this week that he loves sports betting more than he loves basketball. And if that's the crisis that a commissioner, and I think one of the things we would probably all agree, Doug and I, who know Adam personally, I could probably find him in the bakery a lot of Sunday mornings, although I heard he just sold his house and is moving from the
Mhm.
block north of me. But you know, and Jeff, if you may have encountered him along the way, I think almost everyone who meets Adam Silver says he's the most human and one of the most decent people in leadership at sports.
Wonderful man.
And we'll probably talk about the crisis that baseball's facing, and we might not use the same glowing terms about Rob Manfred in the same way. Exactly. But Adam is out front. He's in a lead position. He has a great reputation. Basketball is on an ascendancy internationally and globally, and in some bases on the kindness of his watch. Doug, can we go inside the commissioner's office in this moment? Can you take that role if I've come in, the guy who's discovered this and said, we've got these challenges, and to steal a line from somebody else who holds a high office, sir, uh, Mr. Commissioner, we have a challenge here. This is what we've discovered. We've discovered that there are players manipulating bets. We're concerned about prop betting on games. I've laid this challenge at your desk. What's your initial reaction other than, oh crap, what's next?
Well, it's not oh crap, what's next? Because I'm a firm believer that you hold a dress rehearsal for every awful thing that's ever going to happen to you. I mean, you sit down when you take a high pressure, high risk job and you say, okay, these are the 20 or 30 or 40 things that can happen to you. So it should not catch you by surprise. And particularly the way this whole issue has evolved, he had neurons that were at work saying, what do you do? The first fundamental problem is that the job of commissioner, I got four titles when I was hired at MLS. I was president, CEO, commissioner, and the bylaws said, because of one of my predecessors wanted it to say that, I also chaired the board of directors. Okay. So you're at once an employee, right? And you also have this responsibility that any commissioner worth his salt has, which is a strong good of the game clause in your contract. That you can look at your bosses in the eye and say, no, we don't do this shit. No, we're not going there. No, for the good of the game, we are going in this direction. And then you suffer the consequences for it. So, in many, many cases, something as important as this becomes existential. You know, very few people are put in a position that to do their job right, they have to risk their job. Okay. Now, I would suggest that the Capitol in Washington is filled with people who should have that attitude and haven't, right? You ought to be able to put your job at risk. Interestingly enough, there's a commissioner and one who I love and respect dearly, who's Roger Goodell, whose father happened to have been a member of Congress and who took a position on the Vietnam War that he knew was going to cost him the next election. And he became the first Republican to stand up against the Vietnam War. That's why I tell Roger he's the second most important a member of his family with regard to being a leader. And I'm joking, but his dad was a wonderful man and had that courage. So what you have to do is you have to isolate it and you have to figure it out. Now, I think Jeff would agree with me that most people in positions like that get themselves into trouble when they try and middle it. Okay. We'll
Yeah.
do a little of this and we'll do a little of that. And we'll sort of tell the truth, but we sort of won't. And we'll sort of not reveal and then reveal. And the people that embark on that path can only assure themselves of water torture, which is drip, 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 and they get killed at it from public relations view. But at the end of the day, I mean, you have to sit back and say what's in the best interest of the sport, not the business of the sport, but the sport itself. And that's the hat that's the toughest to put on. That's the hat with the most power, by the way. And that's the hat that takes the most courage to put on in certain circumstances because the minute you put it on, your days are numbered.
Jeff, if
The
you had clients like that all the time, you'd probably look like a bigger genius than you might already be. What, Jeff, Doug's called you now. Let's just start. Let's even wear all three of our hats. I'll be the lawyer here. I brought the problem to Doug. Doug has actually said what he said. He wants to not be in the middle. I told him
Yep.
admit nothing, which is probably what most lawyers say when they get up in the morning. Admit nothing. Uh, deny, deny, deny. Uh, you're now called in to help clean up and give advice. You've heard Doug's desire here. How do you respond to what he said, and then how do you advise him to action to put that in action,
so
and recognize I'm screaming, don't admit anything, deny, deny, deny.
Oh, absolutely. I think there are, and by the way, not the least bit unique. Deal with this every week in terms of lawyers saying one thing, CEOs desperately wanting to be seen to be doing the right thing. The first thing I tell clients when they're in a situation like this is that it is way easier to fix an overcorrection than an undercorrection because Doug is absolutely right. If you need to close the hatch and seal people in a flooding chamber on the ship before it sinks, that's an absolutely horrible decision that any captain of a ship must make, but it means saving the rest of the ship. And if you don't make that decision and you do not make that decision in time, the entire ship will sink. And that's frankly, I think the cold hard reality that people need to smarten up and realize that if the public zeitgeist starts to be that the NBA stat lines are for sale, that everything has a price. The NBA stops being a multi-million-dollar entertainment, mechanism. It basically becomes the equivalent of the WWE. The NFL already gets, allegations that everything is scripted. Yeah, it's not a road you want or can afford to go down. Secondly, um, tell them what you're doing. You know what? Um, right now, there are multiple arrests. It's for the courts to determine guilt, but I'll tell you what we're doing right now in order to protect the integrity of the game. That's
And,
an easy bridging statement, but right now they're not.
and Jeff, that's actually one of the head scratchers here. I'll go back to my own experience at Penn State when legalized sports betting comes along, and one of the people who's listening to the panel sat in these meetings with us, and we had some folks who did definitely wanted to take a head in the sand kind of idea. I don't want to know about this. I don't want to pay to know about this. And if I pay to know about this, I'll know about this, right? So the idea, if I uncover it, I'm going to find things I don't want. Ultimately, I think because of the behest of even one of our listeners, we ended up hiring a surveillance service, a betting
Hmm.
surveillance service, who taught us probably more about sports betting than we needed to know right away. But that's how we got up to speed, actually, as I describe it as the people who put up the fence around it. We needed to hear about we needed to hear how the burglars got in to put up the fence. And ultimately the idea is once you're confronted with this existential crisis, we had a lot to worry about. There's obviously no organized crime in Pennsylvania because, it all stays in New Jersey or New York, the bordering states, or Ohio. We had 36 elected trustees who were really good people, but weren't always aware of the consequences
Oh,
of their
sure.
action, who in sometimes scared me as much as the mafia in small ways or big ways. Not in the same vein, but certainly as a concern. We had 800 athletes. This is sort of common in a setting, none of whom were getting paid that we knew of. And how do we put a fence up around them? 100,000 students, fraternities, and other things that had become betting parlors. So one of the challenges is when we opened the doors up to legalize sports betting. Doug said something early on. We took away a lot of that sort of moral apprehension or even practical apprehension of how do I go place a legal bet. We opened it to everybody, and then we started to live with it as a business. And we had to learn really quickly that this was a challenge. Doug, let's talk a little bit about the morality of sports betting here. And that this was the one thing that if you talk to somebody young, I've asked my law school classes, how many of you have a betting account on your phone right now, and it's perfectly legal. Most of them live in New Jersey or are in New Jersey. Um, Sports betting's been legal in New Jersey for quite a while now. There are some safeguards, but can we talk about the moral issue of where betting comes in and some of the economics and why we allowed it in at the end of the day?
But you put a stop sign up on me because I could talk for a long time about it. I mean, I am the grandson of the owner of a Cuban baseball team, and Cuban baseball was a unique sports icon. Tommy Lasorda talks about, and who played for my grandfather, by the way. Tommy Lasorda talks about the very first time he saw a pistol in an umpire's belt when he was playing, and said, I'm in a different sport down here." Um, in Cuba at that time, the bookmakers had free reign of the stands, and just like Highlight, and I, as a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, sitting on my grandfather's knee, would watch bets being taken and paid off in front of my eyes in the stands and at a baseball park. When I was 11 or 12, my father, I mean, it was just a wonderful present. He took me to the finals of the National Invitation Tournament in the Old Garden, NIT. And it was, I remember Duquesne won, but it was back in the days where you could watch a semifinal game and a final game. You got to see four teams at the same time. Duquesne was Cy Hugo Green, St. Francis of Loretto with Maurice Stokes, who was just a marvelous player. And I watched everything. I just was just so curious. It was just a lovely gift to me. But I would watch the same people root for one team for a while in the garden, and all of a sudden it was like a light bulb went off. Then they started rooting against them. And this happened in both games. And I'm 11 years old and I'm saying, "Oh, okay, they're rooting for their team to win." No, 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 no. And I on the way home, my father explained spread, and he explained over and under to me as an 11-year-old. And I went, "Holy cow, this whole thing of my little league team, all I want is for the Bonds White Sox to win a game with me as a catcher." And there's something far more complex and complicated about it. It's been with us forever. I'm sure the emperors, um, going up or down in the Colosseum, impacted on betting. Um,
So I think that's a great point. I'm only gonna stop you. It's always been here, and
it's
we've
always,
always and we've
it's,
always had a tacit acceptance of it as part of our business model for every leader in sports.
yeah. And, I mean, I have some friends in the NFL. One of the crown prince families of the NFL was, they were financed by bookmaking operations in the city of New York. I mean, it's something that has been ubiquitous, but it's got to be treated as a we them. We can't join them. That's where the problem comes in. Okay. Where the moral high ground has been lost forever is this incestuous partnership that has a singular root cause. And that is that I have found that people who are powerful and wealthy and own a business think it's their proprietary business with all of their extensions. The reasons why they started investing in fantasy, knowing full well that the sports book was right around the corner, okay, was that it frosted them. It irritated them that someone else was going to make money on their product. And they wanted to participate in every single revenue stream, no matter how close or how remote. Um, in my book, that's greed. Okay. And what resolves this, what lays the groundwork for some form of stability with something that's never going to go away and something that requires integrity to exist is divestiture. You can't be one of them. Okay. And somebody has to stand up and say, in the army, we had an old rule: you don't build a latrine by the mess tent. You know, you,
that,
you
that
don't
that
take a
that probably is the advice here, right? We
you
can't be
don't
one of
take a
them.
crap you don't take a crap where you eat. Okay, and someone has got to stand up and say that and eliminate it so that you can go back to the old days of exacting a penalty for it,
That
lifetime bans. But right now, if you were to say lifetime ban, they would go, no, no, no. I mean, how can we be so hypocritical? Because we're in the business. So
how,
it's it's
how can we
divestiture,
bite the hand that feeds us?
divestiture.
Right?
It's got to be divestiture.
That's a fascinating thing you say because the last briefing I gave the president at Penn State as I was leaving my role is, are you prepared to make a decision on in-stadium advertising and in-stadium sports betting partnerships? He left a little while after I did and kind of smiled and said, I'm closer to retirement. I won't have to face that one. But other schools have. I certainly my firm represents Brian Kelly. When I went to visit LSU, I stayed in a casino that was a partner hotel. Watched in a stadium that had a sports book advertising in it. So it was even in the colleges and it could be everywhere. And of course, I grab it. It's in your phone no matter where you are. So it's a fascinating thing. Jeff,
Let me
go
add
ahead, Doug.
one
Yeah.
additional thing. When I first started getting involved in the sports business, um, everything was available except what we used to call the devil's three. Okay, you couldn't sell advertising to hard liquor, condoms, and gambling. And right now, the devil is in the tent, right?
There's no limitation, right?
But it
Yeah.
was hard liquor, condoms, and gambling.
Jeff, I want to come back to something you said, and I made an inartful point and went to Doug and got a great story. So the nice part is no matter how bad the pass I throw to both of you, you guys are converting it.
I apologize.
So no, it's perfect. My inartful comment that I didn't quite finish is the idea that every league has invested heavily in surveillance over the past 4 years or 6 years, sorry, 6 years of legalized sports. We've learned a lot collectively. The NBA, I know, has mathematicians with PhDs looking at algorithms of game film. We have surveillance services that talk to every casino operator. There's geo tracking. The idea that if you bet illegally, you're gonna get caught. It's not kind of an if, it's a when, and it's when they're gonna have enough to get you. But one of the things that when I've talked with league members or I've talked with people during this gaming boot camp we have at Seton Hall every year, one of the things that always jumps out is the idea that they never want to tell what they know because then it would be then someone else will know and they'll correct
Figure out
around
a
it.
way to circumvent it.
But
Yeah.
is that a flawed theory, Jeff, in terms of at least
So,
what the public
so
should know?
I'm gonna challenge your original assumption. You mentioned that you were running around and had a gambling surveillance operation in order to learn about what was happening in the world of sports betting. But you did that in your role and capacity as the athletic integrity officer for Penn State University. Who's the athletic integrity officer for the NBA?
Well, they have a chief gaming integrity unit. They have about
Then
10 people in
this
that
is
unit.
their time to shine, but they aren't. They're not like this is
That's implicit in my
absolutely
question.
what.
Shouldn't we be shining the spotlight on them saying, "Hey, these guys are the best in the business and they didn't see this or this isn't what
And
they're
because
seeing."
and frankly, because it was the FBI that came out and announced everything instead of the NBA. And by the way, Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier are suspended by their teams right now. You know who they're not suspended by?
The
The
NBA.
NBA,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That it needs to be centrally locked down. They need to have a very public, very well defined athletic integrity process. An officer, a maybe an anonymous snitch line with actual verifiable accountability mechanisms and structures in place so that people know that if they like this is the time, this is absolutely the time to be talking about let me tell you what we're doing to protect our game. um
Yeah.
the
I'll,
very
I'll,
fact.
I'll let- can I add one additional thing to
Yeah,
that? It
please, Doug.
also
Go ahead.
it also needs to be a guy. Organizations are made up of two kinds of people: brakes and accelerators. Okay, the brakes, the legal department, the risk management department, HR, they're hidden away. They need to have a Joe Torre, okay,
Yeah.
who the equivalent of Joe Torre saying, "I own this,"
Hmm.
okay, take ownership of it instead of, "Look, we're three bright guys who know a lot about sports. We have no idea who this guy is.
We've not
Yep.
seen anybody put forward, right?
We
Yeah.
we have no idea who this guy. If there is a guy, we don't know who he is. You know."
a
You
great example of that. Right now, information about who's injured, who's not, who's going to play, who's not, what all that stuff is being treated like gossip. It's not inside information.
Upper body injury.
Yeah, well, all that stuff. Um, if we can keep the fact that I went to a doctor and had a conversation about hemorrhoid cream away from the public eye and still been able to have that conversation, we ought to be able to have. There are rules. The doctor isn't allowed to go out and say, "Hey, Jeff Chatterton was talking about hemorrhoids." They're not allowed to broadcast that. They're not allowed to communicate that. They're not even allowed to share that with other people within the clinic. All of that information is in both Canada and the United States kept under extremely strict communication confidentiality laws. Why does pro sports not have a structure in place to talk about um, all of the things regarding individual player performance or individual gambling performance,
Mhm.
so that if all of a sudden there's a lot of people gambling that LeBron James is gonna pull up and under, we ought to be able to figure out exactly who is accessing that information.
having been the guy in a public integrity role, which I think was created to have the guy in it, although the first person in it was a woman, but it fits that you put a face to the function that Doug talks about and does that. Should that individual be outside the league? In other words, not in, but on the periphery, connected as a contractor? Should a league have a very spotlighted league integrity unit that's adjunct as opposed to inside the commissioner's office? Because that's one of the challenges in all compliance at some point. If you're inside the organization and kind of enmeshed in it, you then get sidetracked by all those people that Doug described as being in the dark tower, risk, compliance, legal, and you're woven into the organization's reporting structure. If you're outside, you can probably make reports on integrity and be the outside monitor a little more easily. Should it be in or out? Doug, can you trust that?
I've seen it. I've seen it work and not work. I mean, I'm just thinking of the impact and the effectiveness of USADA, for example, with performance enhancing drugs and Olympic sports. And there is another situation of the tip of the iceberg. Only a very small number of people get caught. They do a lot of thumping of their chests. Well, we caught him, we caught him, we caught him, and then the next week somebody. I mean, so there's a certain amount of self-righteousness that is attached to this. Um, Look, I think I mentioned in when I went and visited Seton Hall that I consider regulations, rules, laws as a corral, and the corral is set up so the horse doesn't jump out too many times.
You need that.
Uh, and that you're going to have these if you play with this, right, you're going to have incidents from time to time. I think in particular, I sent you an article yesterday about the Turkish
Oh,
soccer league.
Turkish.
The
Yep.
Turkish soccer league has got a huge gambling scandal on its hands and has just suspended 1,024 soccer players in Turkey. I mean, they just said everybody who's closely associated with this, we're gonna stop it. You've got to do some strong things. I know and love Chauncey Billups. I've known him for a long period of time. He's a really decent guy. He's in a mess right now and probably ought to be, should not be allowed to this free reign that he's got right now because people are dancing around the issue. I think what we're watching, and Jeff can agree or not agree with me, everyone's dancing right now. No one's really saying, okay, these are the hard things, the hard 7 things we've got to do, and we're going to do number 1 today. And everybody right now is still dancing, hoping that either Trump does something stupid, or there's a tsunami somewhere or what have you, and people will forget about it and go on with their business. The prop bet is got to be eliminated. It's got to be eliminated. I mean, there was a prop bet. I think I remember seeing a prop bet for who was going to kneel in the national anthem in the Kaepernick days. I mean, come on. And it taints the entire sport, so the garbage bets have got to go away. You got to go back to with your partners and say you got to strip away all the crap. Although I know you make a lot of money on it, it's got to go away. Otherwise, we're not going to do business with you, or we're going to do something. And you've got to divest. You cannot be the house. Going back to the injury situation, you can't be the owner of a team who knows the extent of LeBron's injury and the house at the same time. You can't do that. You can't be the house and all of a sudden be the only one that knows what's really going on.
Hey, Jeff, how do you put those in actions in a statement? We've talked about a lot of the problems. We've talked about going to war with prop bets. It was one of the challenges I faced at Penn State, worrying about athletes who weren't getting paid, that we knew of, and that they would take bets on small things. Baseball's controversy right now is they are taking bets on small things, and even $5,000 influence these guys to do this, to potentially tip pitches, to let bettors know, and we're involved in a conspiracy. That seemed to actually break one of the beliefs we had. If we paid them a lot, they wouldn't risk their careers on betting. Doug's shaking his head, and that appears to be true. Jeff, how do we put out a statement? Help us craft a statement right now that a commissioner should make, and let's say that Rob Manfred should be learning from Adam Silver's pain. What should he be saying? What should he be doing right now? And how should he use the players in the union as part of the solution? How would you organize that?
So I think Adam Silver has a tremendous opportunity. Whether or not he's going to be brave enough to take the opportunity is a fascinating question. But I think he has the opportunity to accept everyone's talking about they got caught with their pants down. Own it. This is awful. This is a wake up call. Um, we are going to take some bold action. This is what that is. We are going to lead the world when it comes to making sure that people know that the NBA is not for sale. If your sport is dancing with gambling money, this is your dress rehearsal. Learn from us. If your integrity response does not cost you real money, you're not taking it seriously enough. And
Doug,
then and
I'm,
then
I'm
show
sorry, Jeff, I
leadership.
cut you off. Do you want to finish? I apologize. I tried to cut you off, and I think he froze for a second.
Who
Doug, I
who
want to
who
go to
got
you.
frozen?
I think you froze for a second. Doug, let me come to you. If you're a commissioner and you want to implement divestiture, which I think is an interesting idea, and I haven't heard it, you probably can't do it too quick. Is there something you could tell your owners right now about their gaming interests that they have to either put them in trust or move them outside or exercise no decision-making control for the season? Are there some interim steps that help you move that way?
Well, I think, yeah, there are some. I think that the very first thing is after the collection of some data, you have to sit down and clarify your corporate value. And, um, you know, the both the beauty and the curse of capitalism is that it's raw and it functions best unregulated and a wide variety of things. But you're talking about taking a charge towards the capitalistic entrepreneurial ship that the league very proudly stands behind. I mean, it's probably going to be the last place that institutional investors are able to penetrate, because there's these families of entrepreneurs and they are very self-righteous about their freedom and their opportunities to make money and to grow the league. And they've been very successful. It's a $30 billion operation around the corner. And so, yeah, I think you need to clarify values. I think you need to let people know that this is something that can that it is. They had a very difficult issue with the concussions, with concussions, just awful. They seem to have sort of turned the corner on that. They've been able to face that risk, that existential risk, in a pretty muscular and robust way. Um, it's not ever going to go away completely, but it's been mitigated to a degree, and I think that divestiture is an essential part of dealing with this concussion issue, the same way as owning up to the fact that, yeah, we have a game that produces these kinds of injuries, we're going to try and mitigate it. You can't be the house and the promoter of the sport. You can't. And they're trying, but they're not going. And we're going to see this occur over and over and over again. I'll go back to the phenomenon. One interesting phenomenon. A friend of mine asked me. He says, how can a guy who's making $8 million do this for $5 grand or $7,500? And my answer to him was simple. They do it for the action. They do it for the excitement.
It's why they're athletes too, right? They
That's
play and
exactly
pitch
why
because
they're
they compete
athletes.
to it. Yep.
And he's saying to himself, if I throw a ball in the dirt, I'm not hurting anybody, right? And there's this first pitch prop, and I got enough money to take my girlfriend to Cancun. He's into it for the action. So that's the simple answer. It is illogical. It is stupid. But they're going to continue to do it over and over again.
That's a fascinating observation. Jeff, we're actually, this is the bad part of doing these with an hour with interesting people. It goes really quickly, and there are about 40 more things on the outline I'd love to bring up. But Jeff, how would you operationalize just some of the steps in a press release, in a statement? And if you were Roger Goodell or Gary Bettman right now, knowing you have exposure in these areas and knowing that your two brothers are in the dock right now, what would you want to know and be prepared to answer when, oh crap, not what's next comes to you?
Well, I think I mean the very first thing they need to do is take a really long hard look in the mirror, because they're not immune. Like I said, the NFL owns a piece of the very mechanism that is accepting bets on itself. And Doug is absolutely right. That just can't be allowed. Um, the um, there's no way to. It's like being a little bit pregnant. Um, you can't allow the there that's not operating with integrity. It's that simple. Once you have made the decision, shown the leadership in addressing those potential issues, then you can communicate. But right now, they'd be thrust into the defensive because there are really hard questions like that they're not prepared to answer. They 100%. I go back to Doug's
It,
point. They
It,
need to
it's
overcorrect.
fascinating, Jeff. I only want to hit this because yesterday I gave a lecture and said really the history of sport is about controlling the next revenue stream. And it's the one thing Doug said animates the owners. They kick themselves when they're not in control of that next developed revenue stream. Uh, I don't even want to. Fantasy sports was one that developed without their real input, and it got out. The horse got out of the barn, and they were never going to let that happen again. And they wanted to get it back under control. And I remember when the Giants moved to New Jersey for parking spots. So the technology, the thing that happens, luxury boxes, club seats, naming rights, the revenue stream you always hate when it comes up adjacent to your business and that you're operating in a low margin. So it's one of the challenges that we would have to say, look, this is a business that's going to come on board. It's going to make your business more popular. It may have some value to policing it, and I want to hit that as maybe our end point. The idea of legalized sports betting provides information that helps us catch illegal sports betting, and or just the manipulation and fixing of stuff. But ultimately, we're conflicted, and we have to step away from it, and we have to do that pretty boldly. We can't be in the middle. We can't be a little bit pregnant. I want to get you
So
both with 5 minutes left. Go
I'm
ahead.
interrupt.
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
I know. I'm sorry, but I think you nailed it. You leave this up to the individual teams. You leave this up to the individual owners. It's never going to work. You need central leadership, and central leadership that's not afraid to stand up to the owners and go, no. we are not going to do this. That is not what the NBA is about. That is not what the NFL is about. That is not what we do. This is what we are going to do. And if you don't like that, you're welcome to not be a part of our club.
Doug, I think that's an interesting question, and it flows into this. David Stern, Adam Silver's predecessor and mentor, famously said, "My job isn't to act in the best interest of basketball, it's to increase the value of my shareholders, the NBA owners." To some degree, that is the commissioner's job. It is a huge business, and the commissioners have done a magnificent job increasing the value of their shareholders. It's the one business that continues to increase and almost ever upward. What do you think that there's a way we could frame this argument that actually not being involved in this will pay dividends on the trust and other side of our game, that our franchises will get better?
Yeah, it's a tough subject to broach, and it's a tough subject to prevail on. And I think it is, you know, I hate to say this, but it is only when they see their asset in jeopardy. Okay. And usually an asset like that, a growth asset, is in jeopardy when it stops growing, because it's all predicated upon the greater fool theory. Somewhere out there, there's a fool greater than I that'll pay more than I did, right? And it is only when that asset is in jeopardy that they start saying, "Holy cow!" But um, we're a long ways away from that right now. You know, the conversation needs to start with how much is enough. Okay, how much is enough, or do we need to take it all? And when you start talking about dominance, um, you start bringing to, it becomes the battery asset of your corporate morality. It starts eating away from it once you start talking in terms of dominating. That's the reason we have antitrust laws and anti-monopolistic laws, because left many left to their own devices just want to dominate. And this is a part of that tail. It's a problem with a tail, and a part of that tail revolves around this. There's money to be made in gambling. We're going to make it,
And,
instead
and,
of
and so,
I
thinking through the consequences of what that decision making is.
Jeff,
I have
quickly.
a 15-year-old kid. He's on the O line. According to him, he starves every night. We're never feeding him enough. If it were up to him, he'd eat Kraft dinner and macaroni and cheese every night. And
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, it's our job as parents to say, you need to grow, and
Mhm.
this is sugar. This isn't going to
Yeah.
let you grow. And right now, I think there's a lot of individual team owners that are hooked on sugar, and they need a parent to come in and say, let's try eating some vegetables.
And it has
Mhm.
the corrosive effect on the sport of battery acids. So you're almost making the point that some of the crack ups are actually helpful. The more frequent and the more common, the more helpful we are to maybe getting to a turning point that we aren't at yet.
Well, the only thing that's happening with more frequency is they're being exposed. I mean, don't delude yourself.
Yep.
It's happening all the time, everywhere. It's just a matter of, right now we're going through a period of time of exposure, but it's out there happening. It's not just two pitchers, doing first pitch, throwing in the dirt. There you could link it to sign stealing and beating on pails. You can do
Yep.
all sorts of stuff out there, but it is not that it all of a sudden we've got a spate of occurrences. We live with occurrences, and we just have a spate of revelations. That's it.
And that has to be the last word. Gentlemen, thank you so much. The problem of an hour with both of you is that it goes too quickly, and we could do this again and again. I hope if you listen to this, Culture in Sports is here with its great Culture Roundtable. Jeff and I have a new web series coming out of leaders under fire in sports, and I'm sure we'll talk to Doug in that context as well. Doug, thank you. Jeff, thank you. If you were here listening, we can't appreciate you more. If you didn't get a chance to listen all the way, this will be posted on YouTube in the next couple of days that you have a chance to watch us and listen to this again. And I can't imagine a more thoughtful conversation. My pleasure and thanks to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.